Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to today's video, which is going to be pretty jam-packed. I've got a lot of books to talk to you about. I recently read 7 March arcs that by the time this video is going out, they're already released, so you can consider them new releases. I had access to them all through NetGalley. I read them just before their release dates. And I'm here to tell you all about them, what I thought about them, who I would recommend them to, so that hopefully if you were also interested in them, you know whether or not to pick them up, or maybe I can put some new books onto your radar. So let's talk about all the books that I will be featuring. As I mentioned, there were 7 of them, and the first 4 all came out on March 5th. So the first one that I read is Finley, Donovan Rolls the Dice by El Casamano. This is book number 4 in a cozy mystery series. Then I read Bye Baby by Carola Levering, which is a mystery thriller, sort of a domestic thriller that also covers themes of friendship and motherhood. Then I read This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. This is maybe my most anticipated book of the entire year. Top 5 for sure. This is the second book in an emotional contemporary romance series. Actually, I've got a physical copy of it right there on my shelf because, again, this is after the publication date. And then the last book that came out on March 5th that I read is called The School Run by Ali Lowe, another mystery thriller about mothers and how far they will go to protect and care for their children. And then after that, we've got 3 books that all came out on March 19th. First, we've got The Mystery Writer by Sulari Gentile. This is a mystery thriller about an aspiring author. We've got Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle, a contemporary romance type story with a little bit of a speculative element. And last but not least, Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Farida Abike Iyamide, another author that I've read and enjoyed before. This is a young adult mystery thriller set at a boarding school. So if any of those sound interesting to you, definitely stay tuned to hear my final thoughts and ratings. I will go ahead and throw it back in time to all of my update clips telling you about the books that I'm reading as I'm reading them. Hello friends, coming at you from my car today because of reasons. I am here to tell you about the first book that I finished for this video, Finley Donovan Rolls the Dice. This one is going to be somewhat challenging to talk about because it is the 4th book in a series. So I can't really talk specifics about the plot or anything, but the good news is I don't really have to because the series kind of is what it is. All of the books have a similar formula to them where we're following this main character named Finley and her nanny slash partner in crime Vero as they get into hijinks and have to get themselves out of it, is the long and short of it. Basically, in the first book, Finley gets mistaken for a hit woman where someone tries to hire her to kill her husband, and then she ends up having to basically prove her innocence or get out of the situation because that guy ends up dead, but she didn't do it. So the series continues on from there, and it's been an interesting series because the first book got a ton of hype, a ton of love. I also really enjoyed the first one. I gave it 4 stars. And then in the subsequent books, I've seen more and more, not really like criticism of it, just people maybe getting bored of that formula time and time again. And so now I feel like people who are on the 4th book of the series have already kind of determined that they like that and they're accepting of that formula. So I would say that's me. I go in with a pretty clear expectation for this book. I'm not expecting it to be groundbreaking, revolutionary. I'm more in it for the fun and almost for the kind of comforting nature of it, because you kind of know what to expect. And yes, there is a mystery sort of being solved in each one, and there's a little bit of suspense and intrigue. It's a series where we can pretty comfortably assume that like the main characters are going to get out alive. They're gonna be okay after everything that's happening. So with all that said, this 4th book, I'll just say the setting of this book is Atlantic City, which is not a place I know a lot about, but it sounds similar to Vegas in that there's like a bunch of casinos, there's kind of a main strip, and so that's where this book takes place. And Finley is actually there with several of her family members, which is kind of fun, and from what I remember is different from the other books in the series where she's a lot more on her own. with the exception of Vero, who again is her nanny slash kind of sidekick. It was fun having more characters in the mix, I thought, in this one. And also that setting was really fun to read. So for those reasons alone, I think it's worth reading if you're someone who has enjoyed this series so far. Is like the mystery and crime element of it anything special? No, not really, but I don't think that's the main point of these books. Though I will say I did like how this one kind of wrapped up without spoiling anything about it. I feel like it leaves the opportunity for future books in the series to be different, and that would be a welcome change. I'm not exactly sure how many books are going to be in this series. I don't know if that's determined yet. I think I heard at some point it was planned to have at least 6 books. So if that's true, I probably will keep my eye on the next books to come out. I may very well read them, especially if I keep getting them like as ARCs or other free forums. I think the covers and colors of the covers are pretty cute. So overall, it was good. I would recommend it to fans of the series. I rated it 4 stars. I probably would say it's my second favorite in the series after the first one. I'd say I liked the first one the best, then the fourth one, then the third one, then the second one. So if that at all aligns with what you thought of the books in the series, then maybe you'll have similar thoughts to me on this one. But yeah, not a bad start to the video, not a new favorite book by any means, but I'm glad I read it, and I'm excited to move on to the next ones. Okay, you guys, I just finished Bye Baby by Carola Lovering. What a book, you guys. Before I tell you about this one, let me tell you about my love for Carola Lovering, which is interesting because she mostly writes domestic thrillers with really strong, like, romantic undertones to them. It's kind of like romantic suspense meets domestic thrillers, which I'm not typically the biggest fan of. I have enjoyed domestic thrillers in the past, but a lot of times they fall short, they feel repetitive, they feel unrealistic. Actually, a book that I read in my most recent ARC vlog, The Guest by B.A. Paris, is a domestic thriller that I absolutely hated, and I gave 1 star. I feel very vindicated in that review because I feel like this book did everything that book was trying to do in the right way. Not that they're all that similar in plot, but my big complaint about The Guest is that it was just so unrealistic, and the characters just behaved in ways that I didn't find believable. I didn't think real humans would actually do. And Bye Baby is the complete opposite of that, in that this one felt so real and was so believable and relatable, because all of us do have sometimes like deep dark feelings. We get jealous, we hold resentment, and not that that means we should act on those feelings and do horrible things, but those feelings themselves I feel like are realistic. So I love reading a book where I just feel like gets it and kind of gives us a peek into someone else's life that is so realistic, even if it's a horrific situation, and really kind of studies those feelings in people. Hopefully that all makes sense. As far as the plot of this book, we are following a few characters. We alternate perspectives. One of the characters is named Billy. She is a woman who lives in New York City, and she is ex-best friends with the other perspective we get, Cassidy, who also lives in New York City, but they live very different lives. Cassidy has married someone rich, so she now lives a very lavish lifestyle. She's an influencer, so her life looks really perfect. She posts about it online all the time, and she has a new baby. Billy, on the other hand, has just recently started dating someone, but he's not rich. She doesn't feel like her life is nearly as put together as her ex-best friends. So there's a lot of like resentment and comparison there. And what happens early on in this book is Cassidy is having a birthday party for herself when she realizes that her new baby is missing, and we flash to Billy, who's holding the baby, and kind of snaps back into realization herself and realizes that she took her ex-best friend's baby. And that's all we get at the beginning. Then it kind of flashes back to show us the past of their friendship. They were childhood best friends, remained friends through college, and then had a falling out, but now live in the same area and still sometimes interact with each other. So we see that whole progression and basically what brought them to that scary, interesting moment. And then of course we see some aftermath after that. So it's just very interesting because it covers a lot of ground for topics, like I already said, that are so relatable, like female friendships and how awkward it can be when your life path diverges from someone that you've been friends with for a long time, and yet you can stay so involved in seeing how their life turns out through things like social media. I thought that was all very interesting. In Cassidy's perspective, you get a lot of talk about motherhood and whether it's what she expected, some of the throes of the postpartum period. That's very interesting. And then in their past, like in their childhood past, there are a lot of other topics explored that could be potentially triggering. So there is trauma related to sexual assault and rape. There's also discussion of caring for a parent who has dementia. Also within this book, there is talk of a past abortion. And then of course, there's also the kidnapping of a child. So if any of those are potentially triggering to you, then proceed with caution. But I personally felt like all of those were handled, I don't know, very well, and it just made for a very complicated yet realistic web of past trauma and current issues. And this book, there's really nothing mystery about it. Like, we know what's gonna happen from early on in the book, and yet it's just so intriguing. Like, I just kept wanting to read to find out where it was gonna go. So all of that to say, it's 4 stars from me, a very strong 4 stars, which is pretty on par with Carola Lovering's other books. Let me grab a couple of them. So these two are my other favorite Carola Lovering books. This one is another domestic thriller type book. And then this one is much more of a, I guess I would say like a drama or a hard-hitting contemporary about a very, very toxic relationship, romantic relationship. So I would recommend both of these. I would not recommend her most recent book, Before Bye Baby. I can't even remember what that one was about, but I gave it 2 stars. But I'm glad to say she's back with this one. I definitely recommend it if any of those conversations sound interesting to you. And then if you end up liking them, here are 2 more recommendations for after that. So very happy with the progression of this reading vlog so far. I am now about to get into probably my most anticipated book of this entire video. This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. I'm excited to shift out of toxic relationships and into a hopefully healthy and emotional, steamy relationship and romance. So I'll be back once I finished it, can give you my final thoughts, and hopefully we continue the trend of at least 4-star books. All right, I am back with a big update. I actually have 2 books to chat with you about. It's been a while since I last checked in. I have been doing some traveling, which has been great for finishing books. It has not been as great for giving me time to come and check in and give my thoughts and reviews on those books. So we are going to make up time right now, and I'll talk about the 2 books that I have recently finished. So let me scoot over to make room for the cover, but the first one that I have to talk about is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. I am sure that I talked about at the beginning of this video, this being one of my most anticipated books of this entire year, which is really exciting to read books I'm looking forward to, but can leave room for potential disappointment. So I was a little bit nervous that it wouldn't live up to all of my expectations, but let's squash that off the bat. I loved this book as much as I was hoping to. It lived up to all of my hopes and dreams, and I'm so excited to just get to gush about it now. Kennedy Ryan is one of my favorite authors, and this is the sequel to one of my favorite books of all time. The first book in this series is called Before I Let Go. It's an emotional romance between 2 characters who have gotten divorced. They were previously married, they had children together. Tragedy kind of struck their family, which drove them apart, and then that's the story of their rekindling of their relationship. In that first book, that female main character also has 2 female best friends that we see her, you know, talking and interacting with and getting advice. And so this book, This Could Be Us, follows one of those best friends. So that's the connection. It definitely can be read out of order if the plot of this one or the tropes in this one sound more up your alley. It is fun though, I think, to read them in order because we see the couple from the first book in the second book. We see them interact and kind of reference things that happened in the first book. I always think that's fun to catch those references. And it's not like it's spoiling the first book, but you're kind of seeing the happily ever after. So if that is dissatisfying for you, then I would read them in order. But this book follows Soledad, who is a Black woman, and at the start of this book, she's married to a white man who is just so not only mediocre, he's an awful person. And that's made obvious very early on. They're not happy in their marriage, but they do have kids together, and Soledad has kind of been forced to become complacent in her life with her husband because he's the one who works and makes the money. She's kind of the housewife and the mother, so she doesn't feel like she has the autonomy to necessarily leave him or to make money on her own. She's in an unhappy but stuck situation. And like I mentioned, she does have children. She has 3 daughters. At the start of this book, we find out that her husband has done something really shady in his work that is now putting him into legal trouble and putting their entire family into all around trouble. Potential financial issues, not sure where they're gonna live. Soledad is left in a really hard position to make up for everything horrible that her husband has done and basically rebuild her life and her daughter's lives. So Soledad's got a lot going on. Then the other main character of this book is named Judah, who is a man, he is a dad, and he has gone through a divorce with his previous wife, and they are on very good terms. Their family is very healthy. They co-parent their children, and he has 2 sons who are both on the autism spectrum. And at the beginning of this book, Kennedy Ryan does like an author's note where she talks about how this book and this portrayal of autism is personal to her, and makes a very informative and I think helpful kind of statement about the portrayal of autism in this book, everything from the selection of words and phrases that she uses and her intention in using those, while also acknowledging that not every person on the autism spectrum likes to be described in the same way, and that's okay. She's not denouncing that, but goes into the reasoning behind her choices, which I thought was, like I said, informational and helpful. So I enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed reading about Judah's family. And what I love about this book is what I love about all of Kennedy Ryan's books and about emotional romances in general. I love when characters have complicated, realistic, real lives that they are dealing with that are messy and not always perfect, and they need to lean on their support systems for, and that build up the story to be more than just a romance, because eventually this book is the romance between Soledad and Judah, but it's a long road. It takes a long time for them to get together, and they've got a lot of just logistical issues to figure out before they can truly be together. They've got their own kind of traumas and reservations that they're working through from their past relationships and marriages. Children always complicate a romance, I think, in the best way. I love romances where at least one character has children. In this case, they both have multiple children. So I thought that was kind of unique and really interesting to read about. But despite all of those difficult emotions and situations and things that they're dealing with, this book also has so much humor in it, and lightness and flirtation and a lot of steamy scenes. So it's a nice balance, I think, between all of the things that make a really great romance. By the end of this book, I felt like I really deeply knew these characters and I loved them and I wanted the best for them. I wanted the worst for everyone who was doing them harm. It just was so good. So I can't rate this book anything other than 5 stars. In the back of this book, it was mentioned that Hendrix's book is coming out in 2025, which is the 3rd woman in this little trio of friends. So you know I will be placing my pre-order for that. I will be requesting it on NetGalley as soon as I can. And Kennedy Ryan in general is going to be an author that I keep my eye on forever. I probably will read all of her upcoming future releases and do need to make my way through the rest of her backlist because she has quite a long one. So in general, if you like emotional romances, if you like romances between characters with children with really messy backstories and situations, characters who have been married before, then I would recommend this book. All right, and then shifting gears to the other book that I have finished and need to update you on, it's The School Run by Ali Lowe. And this is a completely different vibe, not only in genre, but also because this is a book that I was not highly anticipating. I had never heard of this book or author before. I requested it on NetGalley kind of on a whim because I thought the premise sounded interesting, but I really had no expectations for it, which is rare, but is fun to go into books sometimes completely blind in terms of what to expect. So this is a mystery thriller book. It's set in Australia and it's about this school. It's this prestigious private school for teenage boys, really preteen boys. I think when they enter the school, it's like age 11 or 12. And specifically in this book, we mainly follow 3 mothers of boys who are trying out to be accepted into this school. And the way this school does it is they have this gala day. It's one day where the boys all go. They have like a sports tryout. They have an interview with the president or like the dean of the school. And then there's a social dinner for all of the parents to mingle with the school staff. And after that day, then they choose who can be accepted into the school. And it's very prestigious. There are way more boys trying out for these spots than there are spots for them. So it gets pretty political, it gets pretty heated, and eventually throughout this book, secrets get revealed and we find out that everyone's kind of hiding skeletons in their closet, as people often are in thrillers. And yeah, we're just learning all the secrets. So to start, I had kind of a hard time getting into this book because it is set in Australia. It uses a lot of Australian like slang terms and phrases that I didn't know what they meant. So I felt kind of lost at the start of this book. Plus the fact that it follows those 3 main women that I was talking about, which I often find confusing to cycle between POVs like that. Plus here and there we get other random POVs thrown in. So it just was a lot to kind of wrap my head around to start, but I'm really glad that I stuck with it because at some point, I don't know, around 20 to 30% into the book, I realized I was hooked. I really liked the overall premise of this book, following this school and these boys trying out for these spots and these moms who will do anything for their sons to get into the school. It felt realistic and yet is unique and not quite something I've ever read before. I don't know if it's just because I am a mom that I could really see myself. I don't know if I would say fully in these characters, but you know, it's that impulse, it's that instinct to do whatever it takes to get the best for your children. And I know there are a lot of people who like that trope in books, that how far would you go for someone you love type of trope. And I would say that is definitely here in this book, explored multiple times over. So I did really like that premise. And again, by that 20-30% mark, I kind of had the characters down and I was just intrigued and invested to know where they were all gonna end up. The other thing I will say that I liked about this book is it's a typical mystery thriller in that there are a lot of twists and reveals throughout the book, which I love, where things are kind of revealed and turned on their heads and you start looking at different relationships differently. That was all good. By the end, there was a lot of like tension and suspense built up. So I was just like going with it to figure out where we were gonna go. And I will say that some of the twists and reveals, I appreciate that they weren't your typical domestic thriller twists, which it's really hard to talk about and expand on like thoughts on twists in thrillers without giving spoilers. So I won't say too much about it. All I will say is that a common gripe I have with domestic thrillers is that everyone is always cheating on everybody. That seems to be the series of twists that usually is revealed. And I'll just say I'm glad that this book didn't do that. There were a couple of marital relationships that really did prove to be strong. And I appreciate that as someone who's also married. You know, I like sometimes for it to be true that a person's spouse can be their #1 confidant and not always the bad person with, you know, the skeletons and lies and stuff like that. So that's all I'll say. Again, there's so many characters in this book that I don't think I can really spoil anything, but I did just have an overall fun time with this book, and I would recommend it to anyone who that premise sounds interesting to. If you like domestic thrillers, but kind of like me, get sick of the same exact thing over and over again. For me, this was something different, so hopefully that could be the case for you as well. And overall, I gave it 4 stars, so it was solid. And I haven't explored this author's backlist at all. I think she has a couple of other domestic type thrillers out, so maybe I will check those out in the future. But I'm glad I took a chance on this one. And fun fact, speaking of mothers and sons, Lo, as in the last name of this author, is my son's name. And I think that that was probably the thing that initially drew my eye to this book and author in the first place. Lo is not an overly common name, so that's probably what had me click on it, read the synopsis, ultimately request it, and I'm happy to say that I enjoyed it. So with that, I'm gonna continue on with books for this video. I think I have 3 left. I will be back once I have finished one of them. Not sure which one I'm gonna start next, so I'll just let you know all the details in my next check-in, and hopefully we can continue on with all of the good books. All right, my friends, I'm back with a couple of updates for you. I have attempted to read 2 books since my last update, so let's talk about how they've gone. The first one I attempted to read is The Mystery Writer by Sulari Gentile. I had this book as an advanced audio galley through NetGalley, so I only had the audio version of it, which I don't usually do on NetGalley, mostly because they don't usually have that many audio versions available. But this one they did, and I have been fairly interested in reading this book since reading The Woman in the Library by the same author last year. That one was kind of a reverse locked door mystery about a woman who died in a library. A group of people were in a room nearby when it happened. They solved that mystery. That book also has an interesting meta quality to it because there's like a book within a book within a book. I found that one really interesting, entertaining, and satisfying and impressive, specifically because of that specific meta quality to it. I really enjoyed it, so I was interested to read this follow-up book by that same author. This is also a mystery. We're following a main character who is a woman who at the start of this book is going to stay at her brother's house. She shows up unannounced. He's not expecting her. He doesn't know why she's there, but it turns out that she, I think, was in law school and she's choosing to drop out and pursue becoming an author. So she's uprooting her entire life, all of her plans. She doesn't want to tell her parents until it's more of a sure thing, but she's trying to stay with her brother during this period. So he takes her in, and as she's getting into kind of her new routine, she starts meeting people in the area, and then multiple people that she ends up meeting start turning up dead. So she's not trying to solve these mysteries, but she kind of gets caught up in the middle of it. And I assume the book is about the solving of those mysteries and finding out what our main character has to do with them. I say I assume because I did not finish this book, unfortunately. I only made it 50% of the way in. I just could not be convinced to care about the story. I don't know why. I usually have a pretty high tolerance for slower mysteries, especially if I think there's gonna be a good payoff at the end. But I don't know, I guess something about this main character just really did not work for me. I don't know why the sun is doing what it's doing right now. Sorry for the change in lighting. What was I saying? I just didn't care about the main character. I didn't understand her motivations. I didn't understand why she was like keeping the secrets she was about what she was doing with her life. She wasn't particularly likable, so I wasn't really rooting for her to figure out her life. And then the people who end up dying, I had no connection to. And for some reason, that's always something I find as a sticking point. If there's a murder being solved, I really like to have some reason to root for that murder being solved. Whether it's someone that I cared about who died, or it's someone close to someone I care about who's trying to solve the mystery, and that person needs to find out what happened for their own closure and well-being. I just didn't have that, especially because these people, again, were new to our main character's life. So there was no strong emotional connection or anything. So for all of those reasons, I didn't care about the mystery elements of the book. On top of that, there is a weird conspiracy theory element added onto this book, and it's really disjointed with the main story. It's like each chapter is separated with another mini chapter about some conspiracy theory that's going on. I feel like this is supposed to be the equivalent to that meta book within a book within a book aspect of The Woman in the Library that I said I enjoyed. I don't know if in this one I just don't really care about conspiracy theories. I'd say that's true. I don't find a lot of interest in them. It also was just confusing. I haven't yet found out how they connect or why it's important to the main story. And again, normally I would like to stick it out to see if that conclusion is satisfactory, but for some reason I just don't care. So I'm gonna let myself put this book down. hopefully that's enough information so that anybody who is interested in this book, maybe you also enjoyed The Woman in the Library, or maybe you didn't enjoy the plot in that one, but enjoyed the writing and want to try something different by the same author, or maybe the idea of a murder mystery with conspiracy theory elements sounds interesting to you. If that is the case, you might have a completely different experience, so I wouldn't discourage you from picking it up if you feel like you want to. These are just the feelings that I'm having while reading it. I'm bored, I don't care, so I'm DNFing it. So that is unfortunate, but it did allow me to move right along to the next book for this video, which I did read in entirety, and that's Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle. This author has written at least 2 other books that I know of, and that I know a lot of other people have read, In 5 Years and One Italian Summer. I've only read In 5 Years, so I'll talk about that comparison in a little bit. But this book is a contemporary romance with a little bit of a speculative-ish element to it, because our main character is a woman who, at the start of every new relationship she has, she receives a note or a letter that tells her exactly how long that relationship is going to last. And she's had it happen to her for her entire life. She's not sure how or why it happens. She doesn't know where these notes come from. All she knows is that they always come true. So starting back when she was in 5th grade, you know, she got her first note with the boy's name on it and it said 6 days. And it turned out to be her first boyfriend that lasted for 6 days. And it has followed her into adulthood, where she's gotten notes as short as one night stands, like it literally says one night, all the way to multiple month, multiple year-long relationships. And I find that to be a very interesting premise. I love a good what if scenario. You know, what would you do if this happened to you? How would you treat that situation? How would you react? And I love reading about characters reacting to these weird, intriguing premises. And the catalyst to this book, where it kicks off, is she gets a note when she's about to go on a blind date set up by a mutual friend, and she gets a note that says the guy's name but nothing underneath, meaning there is no expiration date for this next relationship, and she has no idea what that means. Is this her soulmate? Is she gonna end up with him forever? Is something more tragic going to happen? It's unclear to us as the reader, it's unclear to her as the main character, but that's what she's doing, and that's what we get to see play out, is that new relationship. We also get several flashbacks to her previous relationships, again spanning all different lengths of time, and we see the different experiences she's had with these notes and her fate with all of these men. I will say, when I picked this book up, I was really enjoying it, at least through the first half. I was interested in the initial premise. I was invested in this main character. It was reading really easily. I was, for the most part, really enjoying it. You might be able to sense there is a but coming, because at some point after the halfway point, something else is revealed that really changes the tone of this book. The first half, I would say, is really light, fun, and interesting. The second half of this book takes a much more serious tone, and I think it would be a spoiler to talk about why and more of the specifics about what happens, because it doesn't happen until later in the book. But I feel like it does a disservice to this book to not talk about it, because if you're not expecting it, I do feel like for certain readers it could potentially be triggering, or it could just not be enjoyable to read about anymore because it doesn't match with the first half of the book. And I feel like similar criticisms were made about this author's book In 5 Years, which I also read, has kind of a midway twist or reveal that just feels icky. I don't know, it feels like it's hiding something for the sake of shock factor that really changes what the whole book is about and changes how people would go into the book with their expectations. And so if you had a problem with In 5 Years, it's not the exact same thing in Expiration Dates, but it's similar in how it does kind of the bait and switch with more serious subject matter. So I feel like that's all I should say from a non-spoilery perspective. I do, however, feel a sense of responsibility to give a little bit more detail, just because, again, I'm not sure if this could potentially be triggering for somebody. So I would rather have the information out there so that anybody who doesn't want to read about this topic can protect themselves. So I will give minor spoilers in this next section. I'll put the word spoilers up, so if you want to hear nothing else, go ahead and skip until this goes away. But if you're worried about the subject matter, I'll just give a little bit more information so that you know whether or not you should pick it up. All right, good with that. All I'll say for this minor spoiler section is that the second half of this book covers medical episodes related to having a congenital heart disease, which is really major and has some scenes that are hard to read through, even as somebody who hasn't gone through this. Nobody super close to me has anything like this. It definitely takes a turn for the more emotional, and so I can only imagine that if somebody does have a congenital heart defect or disease, or has somebody really close to them that is suffering from that, I don't know, I wouldn't want you to be caught completely off guard by that. So that's all I'll say. So with that out there and with that in mind, I have overall conflicting feelings about this book. Again, I enjoyed the first half. I did care to find out what happens to this main character, what happens with this relationship. So that, I think, is a great thing about the book, is that it's very readable and interesting. I just don't feel great about that midpoint reveal, and I feel like from that point on, the book changed in its tone, and I wasn't having as much fun with it through the second half. As far as like the ending of the book, I'm overall pretty satisfied with where it goes. The conclusion of the relationship saga, I'm pretty satisfied with. As far as like what we get answers to and what we're left wondering about, I'm a little bit less satisfied with. So overall, I think I'm gonna go with 3 stars for this book. I imagine that people who loved In 5 Years could also love this book, but also I can just foresee a lot of really mixed reviews based on where the book goes. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful for encouraging you to pick up the book or not based on your expectations. I'm interested to read a few more reviews. I did read a review by Gabby at Gabby Reads, who gave this book 1 star. So obviously I don't fully, agree with her thoughts or opinions on the book, and that's fine. But she compared this book to early Taylor Jenkins Reid books, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I completely agree with the initial premise, feeling like Taylor Jenkins Reid and her early books, where each one of them has kind of a unique setup and kind of a twist on a typical contemporary romance. Totally agree with that. And the writing style as well is very easily readable, kind of simplistic, which Gabby was making a critique about that. But I know that so many people love early Taylor Jenkins Reid books. So if you love them, then this might be exactly your cup of tea. If you've been missing that from Taylor Jenkins Reid, I think this could maybe fill that void for you. And for me, the way I feel about this book is also how I feel about early Taylor Jenkins Reid books. I do think they're really interesting. I enjoyed reading them, but I don't quite love them as much as her more recent books, where she's getting more into, historical fiction. I prefer her later books, but if you prefer her earlier books, I think that is a really good comparison to make with this book. So with that being said, I have 1 book left to read, one that I'm very, very excited about. So I'm gonna go ahead and dive into that. I'll be back once I've finished it to give you my final thoughts on that book and wrap up this video as a whole. All right, friends, time for my final update. In this video, I've finished my final book. I just finished Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Farida Abike Iyamide. I was so excited to read this book because a few years ago, I read and really enjoyed Ace of Spades by the same author. This is a young adult dark academia mystery that I really enjoyed reading. I enjoyed these 2 main characters. I enjoyed that it discussed a lot about racism. This one is set at a private academy. It was all very fun and very good. So I've been highly anticipating this author's sophomore novel, which is this one. And this one is very much in the same vein, but a little bit different. It's set at a private boarding school. So a little bit different. I don't remember this one being a boarding school specifically, but very much lends itself to that dark academia vibe because all these students live in this one location. They're not completely trapped there, but it has a little bit of that closed circle vibe to it. And then it also tackles some pretty serious subject matter and social justice issues that are not about the injustices of racism, but more the injustices for women, of course exasperated by being women of color, but it focuses kind of on like the Me Too movement, believing victims. It's more that kind of vibe. So this follows our main character named Sade, who is a new student at this boarding school. She's coming in her 3rd year, so she's a couple years behind all of these other students. Well, not behind academically, but they've all been together since 1st year, and she's now coming in 2 years later. So they've all got tight relationships and history together, and she's new to the fold. She has recently gone through some family struggles, so she's got her own kind of backstory. And at the start of this book, she comes in, she gets introduced to her roommate. Her roommate walks her around campus, kind of gives her the lay of the land. They get off really well. They have a pretty good relationship. And then the very next day, that roommate disappears. So Sade is trying to get to the bottom of where she's at, figuring out if she's in danger. She doesn't know any of the other students or the staff members or anyone, so she doesn't really know who to trust or who was friends with that girl who might have information, but she's doing her best. And along the way of trying to find her roommate, she discovers some other hidden, not so great secrets under the surface of this boarding school and some of the boys involved in the school. So that is all I'll say about the plot. I had a lot of fun reading this book. Something about this author's writing is very atmospheric and just sucks you in. I loved learning about this school and going with Sade to figure out where everything is. Like, what are the different buildings? What are the different dorms? What are the more hidden places within the school? Plus digging into all of the characters that she's getting to know. I just feel like it was all very descriptive and intriguing. So I loved that. I was also pretty invested in the mystery for the most part. I feel like it did a good job of giving us some clues that we knew were going to be important later on, maybe some things that were throwing us off, also some side plots and relationships and things happening. It all was good. I have seen other early reviews complaining about the length of this book. I obviously don't have the physical copy, so I don't know exactly how many pages it is, but let's look on Goodreads really quickly. It says 416 pages, so maybe that's not the longest book I've ever read, but especially for a young adult mystery, I think it started to feel long. And somewhere in the middle of the book, I started being like, all right, let's move this along. I will say then at the end, things really pick up in action and in pace. You learn a lot of things really quickly. So I do think something could have been done to even that out a little bit more, to pick up the pace in the middle and slow down the pace a little bit at the end. It would have made for a little bit of a better reading experience, but that said, I still think it was really good. I also really appreciate some of the diversity and discussions in this book. This main character does appear to be queer, and a few of the different side characters have different identities and relationships. So that's all appreciated. And I did also really like kind of the overall theme of the book and some of the commentary it is making about believing women, believing victims, how some people and institutions protect certain individuals in society and how dangerous that is. So for me, all of those really good aspects outweigh the pacing issues, and I thought it was a really good book. So I am rating it 4 stars. I'll have to go back and look at my review of this one because I don't know how it compares in terms of which one I enjoyed more. I think I also gave this one 4 stars, so I'll have to think about that a little bit, but this is definitely solidifying this author as one that I will continue to pick up, especially if she does anything in the adult genre or even anything else within YA that's not a mystery. I would be extra intrigued to see what she has to say. But you guys know me, I love a well-crafted young adult mystery. I find them really satisfying, and they usually have more to say than adult mysteries do. So for all of those reasons, I would definitely recommend picking this up. I think the cover is so cool. I just love it. So with that, I would say this has been a pretty successful video overall. I've got a new 5-star book, a new favorite from an already favorite author. I've got several other 4-star books, which are solid recommendations. Reminder to go check out any of the ones that sounded interesting to you. Find them at your library, find them wherever. Let me know if you have also read any of the books I talked about and what your thoughts were. Or if you haven't read them, let me know if any of them sound interesting to you, if you're gonna add any of them to your TBR or check them out in the future. I would love to know which ones. But other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.